maps, maps of all the oil fields in Iraq, the oil fields in the United Arab Emirates, which would be, Qatar, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Oman, all the Emirates, and all the maps of the oil fields in Saudi Arabia, along with lists of all the countries and the companies that had oil development contracts in that region. That's very telling. My analysis of those it confirms, first of all, that 60% of all the recoverable oil on the planet is located in an area maybe the size of Kansas, very small area. But that's clearly what they were looking at.
We had been dissatisfied, as were the Saudis, with our bases in Saudi Arabia. Huge pressure to move out of Saudi Arabia. Where would we move to? We had saturated Kuwait with our bases. The base we have in Qatar is too far south. Certainly Iran is not an option. Turkey was becoming problematic because they have democracy in Turkey and they actually have to consent to our presence there. So we're looking for a new place to put bases, which will allow us to exercise political, some economic, and certainly military power in the region.
Iraq was selected. It met the required conditions. First condition is it was understood that it was completely defenseless. You don't attack a country if it can defend itself. Secondly, it was important because it has the second largest oil reserves in the world, and it's right at the heart of the main oil-producing region of the world. So establishing a client state in Iraq, presumably with military bases, would put the United States in an even stronger position than before.
Additionally, with U.S. forces all around the Gulf and controlling one of the world's largest oil exporters, the U.S. would have strategic control over Persian Gulf oil. And that's power. In that position, the U.S. can cut off oil to anyone it wants by stopping ships from going out of the Persian Gulf and creating an embargo. So I think it's much more oil for power than it is oil for money.
In May of 2002, trusting that the U.S. military would bring peace for Afghanistan, President Karzai signs a treaty with the leaders of Pakistan and Turkmenistan for the construction of a $2 billion pipeline from Turkmenistan to the Indian Ocean. Turkmenistan and Afghanistan hope to generate much-needed income for their economies. Pakistan hopes to secure an oil route for itself. Its position would also allow Pakistan to control at least part of the oil supply to India. Washington, however, appears to recognize the potential for conflicts with the pipeline that would ultimately serve China's 1.5 billion consumers as well. Indeed, U.S. oil companies are now favoring a western route through the sparsely populated regions of Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and eastern Turkey towards the Mediterranean Sea, and eventually Europe and the United States. For this reason, the U.S. military is not even trying to control the Afghan warlords, whose persistent violence would hamper the pipeline's construction. In addition, continued unrest justifies a large U.S. military presence in Afghanistan that will remain as a deterrent to any other foreign intrusion into the region. Fighting terrorism is clearly not the reason for such a large deployment of troops, as clandestine terrorist cells are better fought by undercover agents and special forces. Is it a coincidence if massive U.S. military positioning happens to take place in Central Asia, the Persian Gulf, and other oil-rich regions of the world? Is fighting terrorism the real motive? Or is Washington more interested in grabbing whatever oil reserves are left, fueling terrorism and war as a result?
Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
In a reciprocal fashion, the U.S. government is using this situation as an excuse to base troops abroad in the vicinity of oil resources, 3/4 of which happen to be located in Muslim countries.
We now have permanent bases in Iraq. We've had them in Kuwait for a while. We have permanent bases in Afghanistan. We are building permanent bases in Uzbekistan. We actually have 4 bases in Georgia. So if you draw a map that connects the dots between all of the bases that we have done since the Cold War ended, what you see is American military hegemony covering 90% of the globe's energy resources in terms of gas and in terms of oil.